Shut up and sit down.
I am a radical libertarian.
And we don't want the government to do a damn thing.
The current state of politics is unsustainable, politically, economically.
You deserve better.
It is about supporting, platforming, and assisting the people who are out here actually doing the fight.
You just take an issue that's important to you and do something.
There you go.
You are part of that declaration against tyranny.
Because no one brings tear gas to a gunfight.
This conversation gives me a little more hope for the future.
The one, the only
fight for liberty. This is the cherry on top.
This is FSM.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fight for Liberty show. As you can see, I have a fun, cool microphone in my hand. I promise I'm not going to be holding a microphone the whole time. I got this one. But we're prepping up for LibertyCon coming up in just a couple of weeks. So if you have not gotten your tickets yet, go on over to LibertyCon.com. Grab your tickets. You can use code FITE, that's F-I-T-E, to get a little bit of a discount off of your ticket. Definitely go on over, check that out. I am super, super excited for some of the stuff that's going to be going on there. We're doing interviews. We're doing some live stream coverage. We're going to be backstage in the green room with a camera and this microphone interviewing people before they go on stage and after. And then I'll be on stage there for a little bit, right on the main stage. So definitely come on out, check it out. Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, I'm your host, David Fite, here to get you fired up about the men and women out here making the world a freer place through politics, activism, journalism, and more. And it is our mission here to give you some hope for the movement and the future while providing actionable advice and inspiring stories to help you get out there and fight for liberty yourself. If you're watching this on YouTube, do us a favor. Click that link in the description. Go on over to Rumble. They pay their creators better, and they're less likely to shut us down for bringing you the stories and interviews that the old corporate media will not. We have an author with a truly remarkable story for you guys tonight. But before we dive in, I'm going to give one more shout out to our other sponsor for the show. As always, it's Blood of Tyrants Wine. If you're looking for a nice night in while sipping on the blood and tears of your enemies and supporting the destruction of the tyrannical state, look no further than Blood of Tyrants Wine. Choose between a smooth Merlot and a sweet Pinot Grigio, or both. Distributed by activists you know and love, bloodoftyrants.wine is the place to go. Use promo code FSM to get 10% off your first order. Or you can kickstart your day with their energy tea called Liquid Freedom. It's a healthy yerba mate blend with a nice kick of raspberry that will have you refreshed and energized to go out and fight for liberty all day long. All of this is available at bloodoftyrants.wine, or you can click that link in the description. Again, don't forget to use that code FSM for 10% off. But without further ado, we have an awesome, awesome show for you guys tonight. Joining me is author of View from a Cage, host of The Rational Egoist, Objectivist, and prison reform advocate, the one and only Mr. Michael Liebowitz. Welcome to the show. If I can get you up, there you are.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show. It's great.
It is an absolute pleasure. So I always kind of like to start off. Hold on, okay, this is gonna be janky. There we go. You guys can still hear me over here, right?
That's a nice mic. It's a loud volume you got going on.
All right. Thank you. I've had this one for a while, and it has been a godsend. There was no way I was holding that fucking thing the whole show. So I always like to start off with like a little bit of a philosophical testimonial question. Sure. I'm wondering, where were you introduced to Ayn Rand and objectivism?
Wow, that's a tough question to answer. So it's going to have to take us back about 30 years. I was 18 years old, and I was driving on Route 2 in Connecticut. And I smelled a burning smell in my car. So I said to myself, oh, fuck, the engine's probably overheating. I got to pull over. Turned out there was nothing wrong with the car. But while I was pulled over, this guy came to help me. And it turned out he was in the Amway business. So I got to talking with him, and he got me involved in the Amway business for a little while. I tried straightening my life out. and I was introduced to what they called the Worldwide Dream Builders teaching system, and that consisted of books, lectures, and the books were about 70 books on the list. So when I was incarcerated, I decided to turn my life around, and I said, well, remember the Amway books? I said, I wonder if that guy will send me those books. I'll pay him. And he agreed to. The interesting thing was, on that list were Frederick Bastiat's book, The Law, and Milton Friedman's book, Free to Choose. So I just read those books as part of the system. I said, I'm going to read every book on the list. And they were there. And on the back of The Law, there was an address for the Foundation for Economic Education at Irvington on Hudson. So I wrote to them and I said, listen, I'm incarcerated. If any information you could send me on your organization, on freedom, I'd be happy to. I would just be ecstatic to read it. And they gave me a year's subscription for free to Ideas on Liberty. It was their print magazine at the time. Now, I know it's long, but it's an interesting story. And the inside of the Ideas on Liberty magazine was an address for a place called Laissez-Faire Books. So I wrote to Laissez-Faire Books and asked them for a catalog. Right about that time, I read a book called Triumph of Liberty by Jim Powell. And in Jim Powell, it was, I think, 64 mini biographies of people who advanced the cause of liberty. One of them was Ayn Rand. There was also Ludwig von Mises. Friedrich Hayek was in there, Milton Friedman. And so when I finally got the Laissez-Faire Books catalog, in there was a block set of books. It was like the Freedom set or something. And it was Human Action by Mises, Discovery of Freedom by Rose Wilder Lane. I think Economics in One Lesson was in there. And Atlas Shrugged was part of it. So that's how I got my first sort of introduction to reading Ayn Rand's books was from Laissez-Faire Books. But I had been, even prior to reading her, converted to the liberty philosophy. She just really drove home the moral perspective for me, whereas the economic arguments I already had learned.
I dig it. I think you're definitely the first guest on the show whose answer had anything to do with the pyramid scheme. But I also did Amway for a little bit when I was like 19, and must have been within the same like branch, because I was also, got a similar list of books and CDs and things to read. And I honestly, at 19, I was not a reader at all. I hated books. It was just like one of those things that school made you do that I had finally graduated out of and could stop doing. But I listened to a lot of like the recorded speeches and stuff of theirs. And the one book that they actually got me to read was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, who's also like friendly to the movement and whatnot.
Good book too.
Really good book. But I love that The Law is actually my favorite. It goes The Law and then Life Without Principle by Henry David Thoreau. Those are like my top two, and they're both tiny, so I can read them like once a year, and it's not like a big thing to kind of get through. But I always try to read those two and Art of War at least once a year. Those three books, just because I always get something new out of them every single time I get through it. But so let's get into the kind of meat and potatoes of the life story, and walk me through the situation that landed you in a cage for 25 years.
Okay, to
as much as you want to tell.
No, I'll tell you. Listen, you can ask me anything as long as it doesn't involve putting somebody else's business out there. I'll answer any question you ask. I'm an open book. I grew up, I was raised by my mother. She was a single mother, and she was a heroin addict. I grew up in a housing project in a suburb. So it's not, I wasn't living in a New Jack City neighborhood, but it was low income housing. My father was a heroin alcoholic. He was in and out of my life as a kid. And the interesting thing is, within my neighborhood, there were kids that were troublemakers and there were good kids. And I always gravitated toward the troublemakers. Always. That's who I looked up to. That's what I wanted to be like. My father had a reputation in town for being a tough guy. I wanted to be like my father. The problem was, I was a pussy. Can I swear on your show? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. I was very small. I was a skinny kid, and I couldn't fight, so I always got beat up all the time, which didn't go very well for cultivating the tough guy image. So I figured out what I needed to do was get a lot of tough friends and employ weapons against people that crossed me. And so that's what I did. I sought out tough guys and hung around with them. And I just became the most ruthless person in my neighborhood. And I got evicted from the project when I was 13, and I moved in with my grandmother, and then I started hanging around with Hartford kids. Hartford is the capital of Connecticut. It's the city next door. And I became, the most ruthless among any of them. That was my thing. If you crossed me, I'd hurt you badly. And, I had a lot of insecurities and stuff, and I can get into that if you want to ask me the source of that. If not, that's fine too. And so I ended up dating this girl, and I was just insanely jealous. I didn't want, if I had girlfriends, I didn't want them talking to other guys, looking at other guys, nothing like that. So we were together, and she had some guy friends, and her mother called me and said, listen, she's hanging out late at night. I don't like it. She's with these guys. So I actually tried to be nice, and I called one of them up, and I said, listen, if you're going to be friends with her, I can't stop her from having friends, but I don't need her mother calling me, telling me about how she's coming home late. And he says to me, yo, I'll fucking stomp you, he says. So I told him, hey, listen, you're getting yourself into a problem here that you can't handle, I promise you. Leave me alone. And they just kept it up. So we ended up having a little beef. She and I end up breaking up. And then she ends up with a new boyfriend. He and I, exchange words. And ultimately it culminates in I don't want to say employ because I didn't pay them, but I had 3 of my friends go and they broke into his house in the middle of the night. And one of my friends stabbed him, and the other 2 they beat him up. And so for that one crime, I got a 27-year sentence. But I also had other crimes for selling drugs, for carrying a gun without a permit, that sort of thing. I was just an all-around screwed up individual. I was very entitled. I felt like whatever I want in this world, I can take it. If you try to stop me, I'll crush you. And when you behave like that, they put you in prison. I mean, that's the bottom line. So I went to a place where I needed to be and deserved to be.
That's valid. That is, as an anarchist, I definitely have my mixed feelings about the prison system for sure. But every once in a while, there's just kind of like I don't know what else to do with you. There's just kind of
nothing you could do.
No other option. Yeah.
No, I was going to kill somebody. There's no doubt about it. If I didn't end up in prison, somebody was going to end up dead. Maybe me. I'm not bulletproof, so it could have been me, but it wasn't going to end well for sure. Yeah,
I have a couple friends that didn't make it past 20 for similar reasons. So for sure, definitely, I've learned at a fairly young age that the whole you live by the sword, you die by the sword kind of thing. Just modernized, live by the gun, die by the gun. I have had very few friends in high school that were, the gangster types that made it to, even have kids or get married or graduate, anything. Some of them are in jail. Most of them are in a cemetery somewhere. So it's definitely, I was luckily just sheltered enough, and kind of like you said, just enough of a pussy that I didn't take it that extra step that you did of shoring up the loose ends of being a pussy. I kind of just stayed in the background and tried to not upset anyone, and then didn't really get myself into too many of those situations. But I knew all the drug dealers. I knew the beef before it went down, and I knew the stuff was going on. I was just I also lived 5-6 miles outside of town in the country, and would ride my bike into town to get into shit, but it's not like I was ever near anything, the drive-bys and the other random shit like that. Just, no one was coming all the way to me. But I'm glad that you got the intervention that you felt like you needed?
I've never referred to it as an intervention before, but okay, we'll go. Euphemism wins the day.
There you go. So yeah, how would you say that those 25 years, affected, your physical and mental health?
Well, the problem is it's not just 25 years of sitting there. So life goes on. Even when you're incarcerated, you meet people, you have conversations, you're watching TV, use the phone, reading a lot, whatever. So there's different paths you can take in prison. You could spend all your time gambling, you can get involved in gangs, you can watch sports, play basketball, checkers, chess, whatever. So what you do in prison to a large extent is going to determine what you get out of prison. It's just like in real life. I mean real life, but just like if you aren't in prison, right? If you want to spend your time on a couch watching football, you're just going to get fat and not grow. If you're going to exercise, read, get an education, you're going to have a better chance of success. So in my 25 years in prison, I read over 600 books. I got 2 associate's degrees. I did every program they could offer. I designed programs. I co-authored a different book from the one you talked about here with my cellmate, Brent McCall. So I was very active. While I was incarcerated, I became a regular on a local talk show in Connecticut. So
Nice.
I made use of my time. So physically and mentally, I came out better than what I went in, but that isn't even the likely outcome. That's lightning in a bottle type stuff.
Right. Yeah, I obviously have nothing quite close to the length of experience or anything like that, but just a couple of situations here or there. I've spent a couple of weeks in different holding not just holding cells. Like I was on Rikers for about a week and a half, which was definitely an interesting experience at, again, like that like same 19 age. But I fairly quickly noticed exactly what you were talking about. There's, the guys that are never getting out, the guys that are getting out soon and just don't kind of care. And then there's the people that know that they're going to be there for a while but want to leave better than they came in, and you can see that. And I made a couple of like pretty good friends that I haven't talked to in a while since I moved out of New York City, but we even like kind of kept in touch after we got out, that were like, just really, really good people that got caught in kind of shitty situations or got caught up in the wrong crowd and whatever. I think something that growing up, I had a really big struggle with, because I kind of grew up that really rigid, conservative, Republican-esque kind of thing of just like, oh, well, if you're in jail, that's because you're a piece of shit and a bad person. Like you'd see like the crews picking up trash on the side of the road or whatever in the jumpsuits, and it's like, oh yeah, those guys deserve that shit. Like I definitely was raised like not any kind of like well-off shitty, but definitely a little bit of that, like just enough upper middle class that like, oh yeah, those are the people that fucked up with their lives. And then I got really close to that myself, and it was an extremely rude awakening. So tell me about the talk show a little bit. I'm curious how that happened, and what happened with that.
So Brent McCall, by the way, is the guy on my cup. He's my best friend. He was my cellmate for 11 years. He and I were going to write a book called Ayn Rand and the Rehabilitation of Criminals. We were going to distill the ideas of Dr. Samenow and Dr. Yokelson on the criminal personality and apply the objectivist philosophy to the thinking errors that they found. And we were going to write a book about it, because that's what helped us to change, was the moral philosophy and the rational philosophy of Ayn Rand combined with the criminological theories of Samenow and Yokelson. As we were writing that book, we had also designed a program that was built around personal responsibility, criminal thinking errors, value clarification, self-esteem. And as we would facilitate that group, guys would constantly complain about the staff. The staff are unjust, the staff are unprofessional, and we would constantly tell them, okay, but it's not about the staff. It's about you. We're here to fix you, not the staff. But we realized that the staff irresponsibility was a very large impediment to criminals changing. So Brent said to me, listen, this is not the book to write right now, because a book on rehabilitation cannot work in the type of environment that is correction, right? I mean, it's not conducive to criminals changing.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I want to write a book criticizing the Department of Correction. And I said, oh, God. And he said, what I want to do, he said, we're going to have to put names, dates, times, everything, because our credibility's shot. So for everything we claim, we have to say, look, go check the camera. We're telling you the truth, check the camera. This meant putting inmates' names in the book. It meant saying things like, you know, the staff don't follow the rules. They allow inmates to run rampant. Gambling is going on in the block. You're trying to read and guys are slamming dominoes. The cops smuggle in shit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I knew that this was a dangerous proposition. You know what I mean? We're going to piss off inmates. We're going to piss off staff. Staff is going to try to get inmates to hurt us. And I'm 5'8", 175 pounds, and I'm not very tough physically. Brent is fearless like nobody I've ever met in my life. So he's hell-bent on doing it, and he's my best friend. I'm not going to let him do it alone. So although I was terrified, I said, look, I'm with you. You know, I'll do it. I said, but I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm scared. And in one of the worst pep talks in the history of humanity, he says to me, Mikey, listen, the chances of dying from getting stabbed are very slim. And I said, what the fuck kind of pep talk is that? Like, I don't want to get stabbed. What do you talk? Like, why not say, no, nothing's going to happen? Like, something nice. And he says, well, no, you know what can happen. And I said, all right. So we end up writing this book. And when we write the book, you know, we have to send the manuscript in and out for editing purposes and whatnot. And then all of a sudden it stopped coming back. And we're like, what's going on? So he gets called down to what's called the lieutenant's office. And the lieutenant told him, listen, we've intercepted your book. They said, we wanted to take both of you, throw you in seg and threaten you, but the legal department told us we can't do that. So I'm going to give you your stuff. We have to let you write your book. But I'm telling you right now, if any of this stuff leaks to the inmate population, you're both getting boxed, meaning we're getting put in seg. So Brent comes back. We ultimately published the book. Staff, some actually liked it, surprisingly. A lot didn't. They start telling inmates what I can only say are lies. Like, they're telling inmates, you know, you're in the book. They said this about you. They said that about you, which was woefully out of context. They weren't telling them exactly what was said. Sometimes they were making things up. In one case, a guy told a friend of mine. Now, this guy that he told is 6'3", 350 pounds, is in jail for double murder. And he tells the guy that we mentioned him in a derogatory manner. You tell a double murder that I'm slandering him in print, you're trying to get me killed.
Yeah.
But the guy came to me. He said, Mike, listen, this is what happened. The guy told me that. And I said, okay, Daryl. I said, would you be willing to go on the record? Everybody else that came to me and told me the staff were trying to get me beat up said, I'm not going on the record. You can forget about it. Daryl said, I absolutely will go on the record. No problem. So I said, are you sure? I'm going to write the commissioner tonight. So I did, but nobody ever talked to him. In the meantime, Brent, they separated us. They transferred him out of the facility. So now I'm alone in the prison, where inmates are mad at me. Some of them, staff's mad at me. Staff want to get me hurt. But some inmates were like, no, fuck that. You did what was right. You said what you were supposed to say. You know, we got your back. Don't worry about it.
Nice.
So while that's going on, I kind of have to back up a little bit. Brent and I had written to every media outlet in the state, told them about our book. We wrote to 60 Minutes. We thought that once the media got wind of this book, they were all just going to come running. But that didn't happen. Nobody cared. The newspapers didn't care. The TV shows didn't care. And there was this one tough on crime senator, and we were just like, I don't want to get this guy a book because he's going to use it for his own political purposes. You know, he's going to cherry pick. That's not our thing. But it got to the point where we had nothing was happening. And we saw him on the news talking about crime in the state. And we said, what the hell? Let's get him a book. So I called my friend and I said, listen, can you get Senator Suzio a book? I told him where to go and whatnot. He said, sure. He said, call me back in 15 minutes. I call him back. He says, all right. They love the book. They love the idea. They want to talk to you guys. So just, you know, sit tight, wait. They also invited him to a press conference on crime. So when he goes to that press conference, he meets a syndicated columnist, and the senator's assistant says, give that guy a copy of the book. Don Pesci's the guy's name. He's a local conservative columnist. So he gives him the book. That guy ends up writing us a glaring review. It was just a glowing review. I mean, it was fantastic. Then, you know, the staff are still trying to get me beat up. They're, you know, making comments to me. Then Senator Suzio comes to see me. Once that happened, the harassment stopped. It's like they knew, okay, we can't just keep dicking this guy around. And I'm excited. Okay, Senator Suzio says, listen, we're talking to all the right people. We're going to get some changes made. This was in July. In November, he loses his bid for re-election. So now I'm, you know, shit out of luck again.
Right.
But he tells me he still wants to work with me, or I told him and he agreed. So he said, I'm going to try to get you some media exposure. And he's going to different networks and whatnot. So finally he goes to Todd Feinberg, another conservative, but libertarian-ish, very much so. And he gets me booked on his show to talk about the book. So I'm just, you know, exhilarated. Okay, awesome. I get to go on. I get to get our story out. Finally, I go on the show. I do the interview. Went well. At the end of the interview, Todd says, hey, how would you like to be a regular on the show? And before I thought about it, I said, of course, yes. We hung up the phone. I went in the cell and I said, what the hell did I just agree to? What the fuck am I going to talk about every week? You know, I'm in prison. I don't know. I can't talk about crime all the time. And so after 2 or 3 times talking about prison, I said, hey, listen, I know philosophy, politics, economics, psychology. Why don't we expand what I'm talking about? He said, I've been waiting for you to ask. And so
nice. For
the next 5 years, I was a regular. He and I actually are very good friends to this day. He, the senator, the syndicated columnist, police officer from my own town, all were integral in getting me released from prison early. They spoke up for me. They wrote letters for me. And so then I came, and that's actually from being on his show, I decided I wanted to be a podcaster. So that's what I want to do. And so I got out and just, you know, hit the ground running, started the podcast, learning as I go, because I don't know technology, you know what I mean? But I'm learning and I'm getting there.
Hell yeah. You know, I actually don't think I know. How long have you been out?
It was 2 years, November 28th. So I don't know, 26 months.
Nice.
Maybe 27 months. 26.
Well,
26 months.
Congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's and I'm seeing some of the stuff that's coming out of the podcast and whatnot. And it looks fucking good.
Thank you.
It's something that I see a lot just in the media world, where somebody kind of, you know, they make it for a thing. You know, there's one thing that kind of sets them apart, actually gets them the in on, you know, whatever show it is or something like that. And that step to going from like, okay, let me stop talking about this, one piece of me, and like, actually I have ideas, not just a life story that's interesting. I have thoughts and feelings beyond that. You know, I work a lot with Spike Cohen, the former LP vice presidential candidate from 2020. And, you know, we're doing so much work outside of politics, and, you know, every interview he gets, it's still, I don't know, what do you think about Trump? Whatever do you think about this? And it's just like, come on, we're getting families reunited in Georgia that haven't seen their kids in a year and a half. Like, let's talk about that. Like, come on, guys. But it's just, you know, it's fairly consistent. So it's good that you were able to, you know, break that, you know, typecasting sort of thing and get out there. Because I mean, 600 books. I couldn't imagine. I know I'm like one of the least read libertarian podcasters there is, but that's insane.
Yeah.
Well, bravo.
I love reading. It's just a habit I picked up, and I love it. And uh, I mean, reading like Human Action by Mises was just an insane intellectual experience. I mean, hold this constant, cateribus paribus this, cateris paribus that. It's like, oh my goodness, but it really, really paid off. I love it. I love ideas. I love dealing in ideas. I love discussing ideas. I love debating ideas. Sometimes it gets me in trouble, but well, whatever.
I know that feeling. So you did, as we mentioned a couple times, you wrote a book, A View from a Cage.
Yes.
What inspired you to put all those thoughts and feelings into ink on a page?
A lot of people have been telling me I should write an autobiography. And I'm just like, I don't know about an autobiography. Like, I'm not famous. Usually that's reserved for famous people. They write an autobiography and people want to read it. I'm going to write an autobiography and people say, who the hell is this guy? But I was thinking a lot about my philosophy, life, politics, economics, and the way that I think. And I said, well, that would be enjoyable for me to do, to write sort of an intellectual autobiography, how and why I came to think as I do. And so I decided to do it. And I had a lot of notes left over from the Ayn Rand book that Brent and I were going to write, for instance, from a book on rights that Brent and I were going to write, that we did a massive amount of research on the history of natural rights theory. So I had all that stuff and I said, okay, I've got this. I just got to, put it down. And that's what I did. So I talked about how I came to view economics, politics, law, life, everything I could, how I came to be who I am.
Nice. I like that. It's a very unique perspective for sure. Not a book. I'm also a big fan of, I don't know how to word this correctly because I don't want to offend, but the best phrasing I can think of in the moment is like a shortcut to philosophy book of like where someone could read that, and not saying that they don't have to read any of the other 600 books that you've read, but can kind of get an idea of some of that and maybe get an idea of which of those books they might actually want to dig deeper into, which ones they're like, I either kind of get that already or I don't care about that piece of something. Maybe they figure out they don't really like Rand's writing style or something like that, which is something I've heard a few times. But I think another good one is like the Anarchist Handbook that Malice put together, where it's kind of just like these snippets of people where you get to figure out who you like and what you like, and saves somebody like me who doesn't want to read 600 books some time. But it's kind of that like intro into a lot of those ideas and can kind of get you going down that path into like, okay, now I actually have to read everything Ayn Rand's ever written, because if he read it and came out like this, I got to read it and try to understand it more. It kind of gets people into it in a way that's more digestible than, a 900-page novel.
Well, you could also just read The Virtue of Selfishness. I have it around here somewhere, but oh, look at this. Here's the aforementioned 900-page novel, Atlas Shrugged. Yeah, I mean, there's
I
shorter
still haven't
books,
made it
but
through that one. I've started it twice and I'm struggling. I can't do it.
Why? What's the issue with reading? Is just put you to sleep?
Honestly, yes. It's something that like I don't want to just like blame the disorders or whatever, but the ADHD makes it very difficult to just kind of sit still and just have one train of thought. So I a lot of times I will either, also I sleep like shit a lot of times, which doesn't help. That like once you finally get yourself relaxed and calm and reading, your body's like, oh, we're going to sleep now because this is the most relaxed I've been in a while. So I'm either doing that, or it's one of those things where, you read something that's kind of interesting in like the first couple lines of a page and your eyes keep moving and you're technically reading, kind of like you can like be hearing, but not actually like processing. And I'll just be going down a train of thought in the back of my head about what I read while I'm kind of going over more lines, and then I realize I didn't actually read any of it. I have to go back and redo it. And it just kind of, also I've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old and a wife, and just kind of life doesn't always allow that amount of time to sit down and read. But it's something, to give the wife a bunch of credit, she has been trying to do more of. She's a big reader. And so also the like husband and kids and things has made her less of a reader. She's trying to get back. So a lot of times, unless there's something crazy going on lately, we've been, reading in our separate books in bed before we go to bed and whatnot. And we're getting there. At the moment, I can still consider it a philosophy book, even though it's not. I'm reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I've heard a lot about it. I've never actually read it. But how did you get drawn into the liberty movement without being a reader? It seems like that's like the draw.
It definitely does seem to be for very many people. I honestly, a little bit of social media and a little bit of just actually getting into politics when I turned 18. So I was 19 I turned 18 in 2015. So the 2016 election was my first one that I could actually vote in. And I hated Bernie. I hated Hillary. I hated Trump. I hated Rubio and Cruz. And I was just complaining about politics to my parents constantly because I'd gotten like really into. I always was like, I was a history nerd. I was a little bit of a political nerd, so I was always fairly into it. And then I'm like, I finally get to vote, and these are my fucking options. Like, what are we doing here? And my dad saw something on like Facebook about Gary Johnson, and foolishly, like an idiot, thought that if he could show me something that I liked, it would shut me up. He didn't realize what libertarians are and what we do. So now I host a podcast, and I literally haven't shut up about libertarianism since. But he was like, "Hey, check out this guy. You might actually like what he has to say." And I looked him up, and I was like, "Guns and drugs from the same candidate? Let's go." I had never smoked before. I was still like a Christian that thought that weed would send you to hell. But I thought that was, your right to do. If you want to send yourself to hell by being gay or being a pothead or being an alcoholic, like, you should be able to do that. So it was a fairly easy transition into libertarianism through that. But it definitely, the way was paved by kind of that like 2012 to 2018 high point of libertarian social media content, from like Being Libertarian and the Free Thought Project and Police the Police and Free the People, and, all of those organizations when they were kind of first coming up, and just posting a bunch of what looked like when you're reading Facebook or whatever, these big accounts and with big followings and whatnot. And looks like legitimate media, so it looks like real articles coming out about police brutality or corruption or this or that. And it kind of like definitely paved the way for then they also were posting a little bit about Gary and some of the other LP candidates in 16. So I was always a little bit of like an independent kind of free thinking conservatarian. I was like borderline Hoppian when coming in. I was like, gay people are going to hell, but like, fuck it, you can still let them get married. that's where I was at coming in. And then just conversations with people. I got fairly involved in the LP pretty quickly, and was on the Manhattan County board by like mid 2017, and ran for office in 2019. Worked on Larry Sharp's campaign twice over, Tulsi Gabbard and a couple of other Democrats and Republicans here and there, and just kept talking to people. And so it honestly, it very much has just been a like interpersonal communication conversion of just a bunch of people telling me that like closed borders are stupid, and
it doesn't work out well in the end, or pushing the issue on the drug war to like all drugs, not just the ones I like, or some of those other issues that I kind of got originally, but didn't go that extra mile into the philosophy. I only kind of knew the policy. And yeah, it's just been lots of joints and beers shared at like conventions and county meetings and stuff like that.
I actually I've been on Larry Sharp's show a few times, but on one of the times I was on his show, I debated Jeremy Kaufman about objective morality. It made me think of it because I remember a few weeks back you posted that there can be no objective morality. So I debated Jeremy Kaufman on, it was supposed to be about immigration, but it turned into what I pointed out to him is you're in one hand saying that there's no objective morality, and on the other hand, you're passing all kinds of moral judgments. Why don't you see the discrepancy there? And his answer was basically just a short range pragmatic one, that I just say what I need to say to try to get things done, which I'm not a fan of, but I'm not a fan.
At least he's honest about it. That's what, like, one of the few things I like about Jeremy is that he's very honest about his intentions and his methodology.
I guess you can give him that.
But I mean, can an objectivist ever really debate a libertarian without it coming down to objective morality? I feel like that's like the crux of, that's like the major difference between the two ideologies.
Well, it is. It's a vital difference. I mean, that's why when I'm talking with libertarians, and I always want to go to, you're making moral pronouncements, right? If you're saying X has the right to do B, why does X have the right to do that? Rights are a moral concept. So unless you're prepared to defend a moral theory, then you're just starting midstream and asserting something as a right. And it just makes rights look like what Bentham called them, nonsense on stilts, because they're completely divorced from anything else. And so that's why it's always going to come to that. And I'm okay with that. And not everybody obviously is going to agree, and not everybody has to agree. But I do think those are very important discussions to have if we're going to promote capitalism and, individual liberty.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like not to get too much into the weeds on this, but fuck it, let's have some fun.
Yeah.
Because I think for me, one of the reasons that I normally get into arguments with you guys about it, and normally I won't actually argue with an objectivist about objectivism. I don't often challenge people's like core ideology. I will just pick an issue and try to move the needle on an issue if I think that they're wrong about it. But I don't say like your core ideology is wrong to anybody, even communists. I don't usually do that. But I think I usually have the kind of difference between philosophical reality and reality. Like, there's a difference to me between what I would consider objectively moral and immoral versus what society subjectively would consider it. And a lot of times it's more beneficial to operate off of the latter, the kind of subjective societal understandings of things, because it makes it easier to interact with the general society and on an ideas basis. So I oftentimes will, adopt whoever I'm talking to's not their entire point of view, but kind of their worldview and language model for the purposes of that conversation, so that I can talk to them a little bit better. So like if I'm talking to an out and out communist, I will shit on capitalism by name, because what they understand as capitalism is not what we understand as capitalism. It's two different things. What they're complaining about is bureaucracy and things that we know are the antithesis of free market capitalism. But if I can call something capitalism, make them hate it, and get them on my side to go like lobby against a bill that's bureaucratic and grows the government, but they see that as capitalism. I see that as communism. But the capitalists and the communists can come together on, that's actually just tyranny, and fight it. It's just easier if you kind of adopt their language model. And that spills over into some of my just actual philosophy, where I don't draw a line on things that my line is just, even if I consider it objective, the world considers it my subjective opinion. And so that doesn't really do much for me to figure out where that exact objective line is if no one's going to listen to me. So I just kind of stick to the things that either are considered objective widely, or there's a lot of room for subjective debate on it, like politics, where there's a lot of different opinions and everyone's kind of all over the place. There's a lot of room for conversation there. And I just kind of try to stay away from religion and morality and the things that people get really bent out of shape about.
Well, I think there's a big hint there, and that's the fact that people get so bent out of shape about it. It's because morality drives our behavior. Our moral views ultimately drive what we do. So in order to defend capitalism, freedom, the utilitarian arguments of the economists just aren't going to hold sway. I think they're important. I think they're a part of it. But ultimately, if people think that it's evil to earn money, for instance, it's evil to be rich, it's evil to be an entrepreneur, they're going to oppose capitalism regardless of the arguments you put forward. Until they embrace a morality that is conducive with the profit motive. I mean, like you say, well, the communists, they don't view capitalism as we do. Well, at the very core, they've adopted the labor theory of value, and they think that if somebody is working on something and somebody else profits off it, that's exploitation. And in order to defeat that, you have to demonstrate why that's a moral exchange between the two people. And I don't see how you're ever going to bring people to the philosophy of freedom by agreeing them when you really don't, adopting their terminology, and then trying to do the bait and switch. And when you say what others consider moral, you're already putting other people's thoughts ahead of reality in the moral sphere in a way you would never do in another sphere. What I mean is this: it would not matter to you one bit if the majority of the society said you should feed your children cyanide. You would say, and rightfully so, fuck you, I'm not feeding my kids cyanide, I'm feeding them healthy food because I want them to live. It wouldn't matter what anybody else thought. When it comes to morality, however, you're dealing with abstractions. So it's a lot easier to evade the reality of what is moral and what is immoral, and then you kind of can pander or cave to other people. But it's just as dangerous in the moral sphere as it is in the physical sphere, because you're talking about your actions, you're talking about your beliefs, how you conduct yourself, the type of society you want to live in, and ultimately the politics that we're going to embrace.
Yeah, I'm honestly not even defending myself, but more just explaining, because I definitely think that there is utility in figuring a lot of those things out. And part of me, I just feel like there's some time left. I'm 28. I know that there's part of it is I'm rejecting the notion of concreting some beliefs that I just know I'm too young to fully understand. That I know it's going to change as my kids get older, as I get older, as I experience a little bit more of life. I know that there's opinions and things that are just not going to hold up from my 20s. And so I just kind of leave them a little bit fluid, because it's a lot easier to move a fluid and grow and kind of mature those ideas than it is to be like, all right, it's this, and then it's this, and then it's that.
That's a very mature outlook, by the way. That right there,
Thanks.
Understanding that you're in your 20s, and it just occurred to me as you said that. I had a flashback to my 28th birthday. For my 28th birthday, Brent gave me Socialism by von Mises. And I know that I read that prior to reading Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, because I knew Brent was going to get me one of those 2 books for my birthday, and he got me Socialism. So it just occurred to me that when I've turned 28 years old, I had yet to read Socialism by Mises. I had yet to read Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology by Ayn Rand, and I had yet to read Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. So I try to be aware of that, like when I'm talking to somebody young, that not to try to project onto them where I think the person should be, because where was I at that point? You know, like there's this guy Liquid Zulu. I don't know if you've heard him or seen him, but he's an objectivist who also is an anarcho-capitalist, which to me are contradictory notions. And I would go really hard at him because people told me this is the best debater out there. Nobody can beat him. So I said, well, I think I can beat him. So I went at him really hard. And then he told me he was 23. I thought he was about my age because he's very mature, very smart. And when I found out he was 23, I kind of saw it through an entirely different lens, that this guy's 23 years old. I'm not going to beat him up. Not that I'm intellectually beating him up like he's some kind of a dummy, but I'm just not going to be so tough on him because he's doing the right thing. He's trying to learn, he's growing, he's putting his voice out there. So why would I try to, get in the way of that? I'll give him my viewpoint. I'll still debate him, of course. I just won't bring the same edge that I would otherwise.
Yeah, that's definitely healthy. I have a similar. I have to step back because what I find crazy is how often I have to do the same kind of realization with someone in their 40s or 50s because they like just started paying attention when COVID happened or something like that. And, they've just kind of been, that quote unquote blue pilled life the whole time, they're just getting pulled out of the Matrix or whatever. So it's like, Neo versus like one of the kids from whatever the place is. I'm spacing. Where, like I grew up in this. Like I said, I was a history nerd. I was a political nerd. I met Chuck Schumer at least half a dozen times before I turned 18. I've met every governor of New York State at least once throughout my life. I was a nerd about this kind of stuff. Every vacation we went on, it was as I was also homeschooled, so we did a lot of school/vacation things. So we always had to learn shit when we were on vacation. But that meant, I've toured Washington's house. I've been to like the General Douglas MacArthur Museum and like gravesite. There's just like a whole bunch of nerdy shit. So I'm talking to people, especially like in 2020 or 2021, and I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You're like 50. You should know this by now. But if you haven't been paying attention to any of it, you weren't noticing the flip-flops. You weren't noticing that George W. Bush was more pro-immigration than Biden was. Like you don't, if you weren't paying attention, you don't know that. And so I have to take that step back of just, I've been in the movement and in the party and know the drama and the backstories there and like just politics in general for a decade now, actively. Some people kind of just started paying attention when it actually hit them in the face that they had to, which we also need to not beat people up for that. Like welcome them in, be like, better late than never.
I always read about libertarian drama, and I thought to myself, what I want to do is I want to get out and I want to bring different groups together. That's what I thought. Well, that's what I wanted to do, and I thought was possible. And I actually became the spokesperson for the Libertarian Party of Connecticut. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. And I had on one of the higher ranking members of the show, came on my podcast. He is an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not. So we debated secession. And, I wanted to demonstrate that you can have different views and be a libertarian. What started to happen, though, is there were things I could not brook. For instance, the Mises Caucus of Alabama put out a meme praising the Unabomber. And I'm just like, I cannot be associated with that. Like, I just do not. So I went to the chairman of the Connecticut party and I said, listen, we've got to disavow this. I don't want to be associated with it. And he said, no, we don't do that. And so I said, well, then there was some things going on where people were, and I don't know what your stance is. I'm against all foreign aid. I don't think we should have foreign aid.
Agreed.
But I also, when I look at the Middle East, I say that the people of Israel and the government of Israel, I give them the moral edge over Hamas. And it seemed to me what a lot of people who called themselves libertarians were doing was conflating the two. Like, I can be opposed to funding somebody else's war, but not think that they're the bad guy in the war. Like, I don't think Ukraine is the bad guy against Russia. I don't think we should be giving them money and weapons either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and then I saw some just vile stuff coming out of New Hampshire. And at the time, I didn't know, the internal politics of the New Hampshire Libertarian Party and all that stuff. I just knew that they said, there was a post they put out there that said, I wish my girlfriend would look at me the way the Israeli hostages look at Hamas. And I said, man, fuck that. I cannot be a part of this. So
I missed that one.
Yeah.
Goddamn.
And then came the immigration stuff. And I saw so many libertarians now were saying that they wanted to close the border. And I just said, no. And then I realized that there's some things gaps you can't bridge. It doesn't matter if we all call ourselves the same thing. If there's gaps that can't be bridged, they just can't be bridged. And then I understood why there's all the infighting more than I understood it from a distance when I was in prison and everything was just coming to me through books.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to keep a group together when it's founded on mostly bullshit and just the intent to amass political power, like the Republicans and Democrats. They have no actual platform. They have no actual beliefs. They have no moral code or moral compass. They just want to win. They don't give a shit. That's why Bernie Sanders endorsed Hillary Clinton. Like, they don't actually have morals in the end of things. Same with the Republicans. We do. And that's kind of what fucks us most of the time, is because we will agree with somebody on 97% of something, but that 3% we just see as like so morally abhorrent, or like just a complete antithesis to what we believe in. So, you're still an enemy. And what I've found is a lot easier and, quite frankly, more rewarding, is working outside of like electoral politics in kind of single issue coalition groups or nonprofits or things like that, where it doesn't matter what you believe about everything else. If you want to end the war on drugs, we can all work together to end the war on drugs. You can be a communist, you can be an ANCAP, you can be an objectivist, you can be, I don't know, some weird transhumanist that thinks that we need drugs so that we can achieve our true like human form eventually. Like, I don't care what your reasoning is. If you want to end the war on drugs, like, let's get together. There's a petition in whatever state. I don't think there's any active at the moment, but
there should be.
Well, because it just ended. I don't think there's
What's your take? Prison reform. What do you do anything with that? Are you interested in doing anything with that?
I definitely am. I haven't done as much in a little while. I was a part of the No New Jails movement in New York City back in like 2018, 2019, when that was a thing. Unfortunately, we kind of lost that fight. The bill still passed the city council, so they approved, I don't remember what it was. It was some like 35 million or $1 billion to build 4 new jails in New York City, or well, fix up and expand 2, build 2 more, and then maybe possibly once all that's done in like 15 to 20 years, they might close Rikers. But of course, it was the Close Rikers Island Act is what they named. So if you voted against it, you voted to keep Rikers Island, when in reality what you were voting for was less jails. Bullshit. But that was kind of that was actually the last like real prison activism that I was able, like, on the front lines of. But definitely something that I have kind of passively supported in the ways that I can when I see it happening in other states and whatnot. But definitely in my top 5 issues that like brought me to the movement is the like all of the criminal justice reform, that as a wider scope with still economic sensibility. I almost got pulled into the Democratic Party in 2016. If Bernie wasn't a moron, like if he wasn't a full-blown socialist, if he was like if they had ran like Kristen Gillibrand in 2016, who is still like a blue dog Democrat, like pretty economically sound, but also like a progressive on all the social issues. If that was the candidate, I would have gone Democrat and probably stayed there for quite some time. But the only candidate on the Democratic Party side that I liked once Lincoln Chafee dropped out was Bernie, and he was just a moron economically. Like I could easily see that as a 19-year-old that just like there's nothing about this that makes sense. Especially because he's not even like a communist; he's a socialist, which I think is the worst of the mix. You can have an anarcho-communist. There is a way to bridge that gap in the like utopian sense. There's no such thing as like an anarcho-socialist. You can't get that. Like that's purely government control. Like there's no moral way to get to socialism. I've met communists I like. Socialists are just wrong. Hot take.
Hot take. Socialists are wrong. Breaking news. Breaking news on the Fight for Liberty podcast, folks. Socialists are wrong. But on prison reform, I mean, being in prison, what I try to explain to people is it's like living at the DMV. I mean, if you've ever dealt with the DMV, like I lived in a government institution for a quarter century. Mm-hmm. These people, I mean, beyond corruption, irresponsibility, indifference, incompetence, it's all blended into one. I mean, the stated purposes of correction are incapacitation, punishment, deterrence, rehabilitation. But all they really do is incapacitate because of the manner in which the prisons are run. Mm-hmm. And I once had a discussion with a officer that I liked. He was one of the better ones. And he says to me, he had read Brett in my book, and he says, Lieb, come on, you're being too tough. There are good COs. Now, this guy had been on the job for 20 years. And I said, okay, do me a favor, name 5. He couldn't do it.
Mm.
Like, you've been on the job 20 years and couldn't name 5 good officers? That's crazy. And then I had a debate with a former correctional lieutenant. I went on his podcast, and I said, yeah, I've never met a good CO. And he said, oh, that's hogwash. And, we were going back and forth. And finally, I asked him, I said, okay, the administrative directive in the Code of Conduct, Code of Ethics governs how correctional officers are supposed to behave. That's the charter. That's what you're supposed to do. I said, do you swear in front of inmates? Yeah, well, you're not supposed to. I said, if you saw a coworker doing something unethical, would you report him? Oh, no, fuck no, you can't do that. I said, well, right. Then you're already violating what you're supposed to be doing. So how are you a good officer if you're admitting to me right now that you don't do what you're dictated to do by your own ethical code? And it's just day in, day out for decades. I've seen how these people conduct themselves. And it's just I firmly believe the way to run prisons would be like I think they should be run like private businesses. Ultimately, where they get reimbursed based on results. So there's this corporation in Europe, I think it's Australia and New Zealand and the UK. It's called Serco, and they actually reward their employees based on results, based on reductions in recidivism. So they get rewarded if the result is good. The private prisons in America, they pay the prisons based on the amount of people that they house. So the incentive then is to keep people incarcerated. So you need to revamp the incentive structure for both staff and inmates if you're ever going to, fix the prison system.
100%. I like the idea of paying them based on like drop in recidivism like the tangible results. So that would change a lot quite quickly.
Sure. I've talked to CEOs. I said, how would your way you do your job change if your mortgage depended on it? If you didn't have guarantee pay where you can't be fired because you've got a corrupt union protecting you,
Right.
how would you change? And it's a vastly different enterprise in that point. Are you smoking cigarettes or herb?
I mean, it's a spliff, so technically both.
What does that mean? When I was a
so
kid,
it's like
spliffs were just joints.
it's like tobacco mixed in a little bit, so just to kind of it makes it burn a little bit like more even. It doesn't canoe as often, so it's a little bit easier to just kind of do it passively during the conversation, and also it weakens it waters it down a little bit, so I'm not like getting blazed out of my mind on the show. But I have like again with the ADHD, sometimes sitting still is rough, so it's helpful to have just like something that's mostly off screen, that's just in my hand, that's kind of playing with, keeps me engaged a little bit better.
Does it help? Like, because if I smoked, I'd turn into a moron. I can't function.
I mean, I've been doing it for a while now, and I've cut back to the point where you know, a lot of times I'll go like the couple hours before the show without and kind of like, you know, level back out, and so I'm not getting like too high, but it just a little bit kind of relaxes me into a more of a conversational mood. I also, you know, I used to smoke a bunch when I worked sales. I did telemarketing for years and years, and it just, you know, makes me just a little bit more talkative, but in typically a good way. Sometimes it makes me rambly, and just like a little bit less socially awkward and more comfortable to, you know, kind of be a little bit more assertive in the sales roles, because I used to be terrified of upsetting people. The social anxiety was strong, so it definitely it helps. There's episodes that you can go back and find where I smoked too much. You can definitely see some of those. One of those being the debate I did between Mark Pellegrino and Dave Smith on Israel.
Yeah, I heard it.
I
listened to it.
That one. Well, so there was audio issues where I really couldn't get a word in. If I tried to like cut in and like get them to shut up and let the other one talk, then it was just three voices and I was the quietest of the three. So I just ended up sitting back and just letting it happen, and didn't really realize that I was just sitting back and letting it happen and just fucking smoking. And then all of a sudden I'm like very high and haven't said anything in 25 minutes, and they're just shouting each other down, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm not watching this, I'm moderating this.
Mark's a good friend of mine. Mark is a really, really good dude. He's great, man. That's who I'm going to LibertyCon with, Mark.
Oh shit, no way.
Yeah, I can't wait. But yeah, he's dynamite. I tuned in. I listened to the debate. I talked to him earlier in the day. I was excited. I've been dying to debate Dave Smith since I came across him on Twitter. It's interesting because my friend, while I was in prison, told me, "Hey, listen, you've got to get in touch with this guy, Dave Smith. He's a comedian. You know, you could probably talk to him about prison reform stuff." So that's why I started following him, was for that purpose. And then I started to disagree with him on a lot of issues. So I've gotten into some confrontations with him. But the thing is, I can disagree with people. I'm not a person that, you know, I hate you because we differ.
Yeah.
You know, I argue with friends. I always have. I don't have that issue. I don't think because you disagree with me, you're either dishonest or dumb. You know what I mean? You might be smart and just really disagree, and that's cool. You know?
Yeah. That's also very healthy outlook that I think a lot of both libertarians and objectivists lack.
Yeah, when you assume your opponent is like dishonest or he's an idiot, like that's just not a really good faith, benevolent view. I debated Walter Block, and he is just the nicest guy. I thought he was just what a really nice guy, and we disagreed on anarchy. So what? we disagree. Still a nice guy before and after. You know what I mean? Like I don't that vitriol, and believe me, I've eaten it. You know, on social media, trying to have a discussion, and guys tell me, "Well, you were in prison. You're a fucking loser." Like Jesus Christ. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, the internet's a fucking horrible place.
Oh, if it wasn't to promote, like I was told early on, if you're going to have a podcast, you've got to get on social media. If it wasn't for that, I have no interest in that. Like none. I don't.
Yeah.
I got on arguing, but no.
I got on Twitter. I mean, I got on Twitter, like the @DavidFite, like the one that I use mostly. I actually started freshman year of college because I ran for class president. And then it kind of like went under for quite some time, and then resurfaced when I ran for city council in 2019, and then was like very passively into it, and would have definitely deleted Twitter probably before it even became X, if it wasn't for the show and the network and everything. And you can't have a podcast and not have Twitter. It's kind of rough at this point. It's where that's why I know Mark. He helped. It's funny. I was defending one of my friends from accusations of him being a Nazi, and Mark chimed in half helpfully. That was like, it doesn't matter if he's a Nazi. He should still be able to be on whoever's show. And I'm like, okay, but he's not a Nazi. And I'm like, that's irrelevant. I'm like, okay, but he's not. Whatever. But he still came in swinging on our side, defending one of my friends for the most part. And, we became, passive internet acquaintances after that. And I finally got to meet him in person twice now, I think. And I think LibertyCon will be the third time. Maybe the second. But agreed though. He's a really awesome guy, really knowledgeable. Again, disagree on a couple of things. But that again doesn't fucking matter when we agree on 95% of it. And you're also like a childhood hero of mine. I really don't care about the nitty gritty politics of it. Like, I was a huge Supernatural fan growing up.
Were you really?
So, oh yeah.
That's awesome.
At least like first like 7 or 8 seasons I watched like religiously. And he was my favorite character on the show too. So when I found out that he was even close to libertarian and politically active and a capitalist and not like your typical lefty moron from Hollywood, I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever.
we were out to dinner, and a guy comes up and says, "Oh my God, I recognize you. You're Lucifer," and this and that. And he's so excited to see Mark. I'm like, "Oh, how you doing?" I turn around, I look at the guy. I said, "What, you don't recognize me?" And the guy starts, "Oh no, it's like, dude, you don't recognize me. What are you talking about?"
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was a funny moment. Definitely a funny moment, man. But yeah, that's the thing with these, the arguments and stuff. I think that the principles of liberty, capitalism, they're important to argue over. It's important to hash things out. Is there an objective morality? Isn't there? Is the utilitarian argument the best? Those are all important things to debate. Even, the finest points, I think it's good to. But when you start to hate people because they differ with you or they come to a different conclusion, that's a different story altogether. Like, that's just not necessary. What am I going to do? Ultimately, there's nobody I've ever met who agrees with me on everything. So what am I going to do? Be friends with myself and just sit in my righteous corner and tell myself how wonderful I am and everybody else just sucks?
That's how some podcasters do it.
Not me. Not me. I mean, I'm not going to pander to anybody either, but I can be friendly with people, even friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. I've definitely could be accused of brown nosing here and there a few times, but
you didn't brown nose in your exchange with Toad. I saw that. That was nice.
Never. Fuck that guy. He's a fucking loser. There are a few people. My thing is, I don't say like, oh yeah, totally, you're right, you're so right all the time. I just ignore bad takes most of the time. Some of my better friends there's people that I've been either employed by or actively employing that I had muted on Twitter just to like not see the dumb shit that they were saying. It's just like a better work relationship if I don't know all of your stupid the nuclear bombs in Japan were justified fucking takes. Like let's just not get into that, and we can just pretend each other don't exist on the internet. We follow each other, but we've got each other muted, and it can just stay like that. It just works out better that way for some people, and others, I can just ignore.
What brought you to the anarchist wing of libertarianism?
Couple of different things. A little bit of drugs first and foremost. Decent amount of acid and a lot of conversations deep into politics whilst on acid. Definitely contributed. Spike Cohen substantially. And then two other of my friends, Livy and Dimitri McKay, who were on the John McAfee campaign back in the day, were like very instrumental. They were part of the acid trip conversations. A lot of them were just very instrumental at like kind of issue by issue showing me that it was just the kind of logical conclusion of most of what I believed. And we can still be pragmatic, and I'm not a Rothbardian. I'm not an ANCAP. I'm an there's some things. Well, so I do consider myself an anarchist, but it's definitely, I feel like there's a difference between policy and philosophy, and so politically, I'm a libertarian. I'm one of the more pragmatic of the libertarians. I used to be a part of that caucus back when it existed and whatnot. I am all for building the bench, incremental change, get people elected at lower levels and be able to move it forward, and that kind of slow step. But on a philosophical basis, I don't think that we actually need government to thrive. And if we had zero government and a society that believed in anarchy, it would not be a utopia. It would not be perfect. There would still be murder and theft and different things like that. But it would be a significantly better society than the one that we live in now. And honestly, I think that it's somewhat inevitable. I think that the collapse of the United States government, whether it's soon or far, far, far down the line, is at some point in time inevitable. And the more people in the US that are anarchists by philosophy, not policy, that understand that we can just have free market capitalism, true, just unhindered capitalistic markets and an exchange of goods and services and people just working with people, that when that collapse does happen, it doesn't have to be anarchy like the news would call it, where it's just pandemonium and murdering and looting and all this other stuff. It can just, there will at least be pockets of society around the country that are able to kind of be a bubble away from that pandemonium, because they're a town that has a libertarian mayor and a libertarian city council, and most of them are anarchists. And when society collapses, it's just like, all right, we rehearsed for this. Like, we're good. We've got our farmers, we've got our this, we've got our that. Like, we're pretty much set and we're okay. So I think it's just kind of prepping for and helping people understand that we don't need to clamor for government to return once it does collapse. Is kind of like the crux of why I push for that end result, not just the incremental change on a philosophical level.
How much Rothbard have you read?
I not as much as most. I've gotten through most of Anatomy of the State, but that is about it. But when I said like I'm not a Rothbard, I'm definitely like specifically referring to like the Rothbard button, like the just blow up the government today button. I would not push that button. I think
the
that
Rothbard
would kill
button, huh?
That would kill a lot of people I care about, possibly myself. I don't know that I lived through that. We got a long ways to go before we can safely push that button. And so yeah, I'm definitely not an accelerationist or a Rothbardian anarchist, but I am philosophically. I think that humans have evolved past the need for a government, or will soon.
Man, Economy, and State, in my view, is one of the best economics texts ever written. Love it. Absolutely loved it. His essays on the Austrian theory of the trade cycle, I think, are fantastic. His book, The Ethics of Liberty, and the Libertarian Manifesto, where he goes ANCAP, no, I'm not. I don't think it would produce the results that he argues. That's why I'm not an anarchist. As much as there's been times in my life when I flirted with anarchy, like Sanders Spooner, I thought was great. I still love him, but I just don't. I can't pull that trigger. I don't think it would work. I don't think that the society would function the way that ANCAPs think it would. It would function. I don't think that what you think would happen would happen. We don't have time to really get into why, but I don't think that's how it would pan out.
Yeah, I'll definitely say I agree with you that I don't think it'll work the way most ANCAPs think it'll work. Is why I'm definitely I've never identified as an ANCAP because I think that's just like is a smaller silo of ideas that definitely some of them are wrong. I think if you try to force anyone into a certain political, like whether it's anarchist or not, if you're trying to force everybody into one system, it's not going to work. There's too many people with too many different ideas. Some of them are going to want to be different, and you're just never going to get homogenized anything the way that ANCAPs want. I very much agree with you. But before I let you go, Michael, I want to tell people where they can find your books, your podcast, find out more about you, give people the pitch.
Okay, my podcast is called The Rational Egoist. That's available on YouTube, Spotify, and basically anywhere you get podcasts. You can see my Twitter tag, or X tag is actually on the screen there, at Liebo is out. It was Liebo is out, not out of the closet. It was out of prison. Is what I meant by it. And then I told my friend, and he said Liebo is out. But I'm also on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all just my regular name or The Rational Egoist. You could find me. My books, Down the Rabbit Hole: How the Culture Corrections Encourages Crime, you can find on Amazon, and you can also find on Amazon View from a Cage: My Transformation from Convict to Crusader for Liberty.
Hell yeah. Well, you heard him, folks. Make sure that you like this video and throw another hell yeah there in the chat. Get the algorithm going and share this around to all of your friends that you think might care about this, because this is, some good stuff. I definitely am I'm happy when we get to branch off into some topics that we don't get to cover all that often. And prison reform is something that I used to have a lot of guests on the show about and have kind of been slacking. So this was definitely great to return to kind of some of the roots of the show. If you haven't gotten your tickets to LibertyCon yet, make sure that you hurry up. Hotel is filling up fast. And then come on back next week. Same place, same time. We've got Amy Peacock, the Chief Policy Officer from BitChute, coming on. So that's going to be super awesome. I'm excited for that one. Michael, thanks again for coming on. This was absolutely great.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, of course. You're welcome back anytime. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep up the fight.